Greetings, book lovers everywhere. I'm E-Train, and welcome to E-Train Talks. I'm E-Train, an 11-year-old literacy advocate, podcast host, and Giving Tuesday Spark leader. I share book reviews and talk to amazing authors, like the one I have here today, a very, very special guest, the debut middle grade author of the compelling and heartfelt novel with themes of friendship, family, and of course, adventure. And the story's so entertaining, I read it in just one sitting. I'm talking about the brilliant Sallie Anne Rodriguez, author of wonderfully written and Junior Library Guild Gold Standard Selection. That's right, folks. I'm talking about Treasure Tracks. Welcome to E-Train Talks, Sallie.
Oh my goodness, E-Train, thank you. That is by far the best introduction I've ever had.
Oh,
I
thank
will
you.
treasure that introduction. It was amazing. And E-Train, I want to tell all your viewers that you rock because you are absolutely my favorite podcaster and reviewer. So I am thrilled to be here with you.
Well, thank you so much. That means a lot to me. And for those who don't know, Sallie was born off the coast of Puerto Rico and eventually moved to Miami. With her husband's Cuban culture and her Puerto Rican heritage, she thinks of her home as a mix of frijoles and habichuelas. Am I pronouncing that right? I should have checked.
Frijoles con habichuelas.
Okay. Sorry. Which makes the perfect combination, if I do say so myself, especially when it comes to food. I'm a pretty big food fanatic. So,
Yeah.
Sallie's novel, Treasure Tracks, really is such a fantastic read. In fact, I'd say Treasure Tracks is one of my top 10 debut stories of 2022, by far. I have a list with all top 10 of mine coming soon. It's certainly a story I treasure. Pun? Yeah. Okay, I'm known for my bad puns, so.
I love it. I'm all about treasure puns.
And there are so many components of the story, and I know everyone listening, myself included, is pretty excited to hear more about your writing journey, Sallie. So let's dive in. That's So I really loved how you drew readers into the story of Finn and his grandfather. Why did you decide to create such a deep connection and wonderful relationship between Finn and his abuelo?
You know, I grew up with my grandparents. I grew up in Puerto Rico, as you mentioned, and my mother was, at the time, she was going to law school and starting her career as an attorney. So I actually grew up with my parents until I was about 6 years old, and my mom was a single mother. So my abuelo really became kind of my father. It was just such a strong bond that we had. So I think I carried that love into the story, if you will. And also because the book really reflects like some Latino and Hispanic culture. The intergenerational connections, like the grandparents, are so important to the extended family and Hispanic culture, if you will. Like oftentimes you even find the grandparents living under one roof in the same home. So I thought it was important to incorporate that, but really it's based on my own love of my abuelo.
I'm just really curious to know, what was the inspiration behind the search for lost treasure?
Yeah, so in terms of the search for lost treasure, again, growing up in the Caribbean, there's so many wonderful stories of pirates and treasure and whatnot. And I grew up, I think if you asked me what my favorite movie is, I'd have to tell you Pirates of the Caribbean because I just love those fantastical treasure hunts. And I also grew up watching Indiana Jones, again, some other fantastical treasure stories. So I think that really impacted me as a storyteller, if you will. And I just really, I came up with the inspiration of, I wanted to have a really fun outdoor treasure hunt. So that is Treasure Tracks.
Yeah, woo! And it's certainly one of the best stories out there. And I also found it really intriguing that in Treasure Tracks, you didn't just write about a search for lost treasure trying to get gold for themselves, but there's also a deeper backstory behind it.
For sure.
How many years ago, well, I don't want to spoil the story actually, so I'm not going to share it. Huh? I got to a little cliffhanger, everyone. And one unique feature of your story that I found really interesting as a nature and all around facts fan. I saw that you intertwined some sea life facts and information into your story. Was that something that you planned to do from the start, or did you kind of feel like the information was needed after you kind of wrote the book?
I think it definitely happened organically. I'm a scuba diver myself, so I
Oh,
am obsessed with the underwater world, and I've grown up on, next to the beach, and it's really been a part of who I am as a person. So it really kind of came up organically, and it just really made sense to do this because Finn was going on scuba dives, right? So he had to describe the underwater treasures, there's my
yeah.
pun, that he was seeing. So yes, I really just kind of had fun, and I figured it also books also are, you learn a lot from books, right? So I thought it also invited readers to maybe, if you look at the cover, even there's a black tip shark. So maybe when you read about the shark or you read about different encounters that he has with all sorts of marine animals, it kind of invites readers, hey, maybe I want to learn a little bit more. So it was really my way of sharing my love with the ocean with young readers.
Yeah, and I I've grown to love the ocean through these kinds of middle grade books. There's Consider the Octopus Up There, and of course, the absolutely phenomenal Treasure Tracks, which is right here. And I've really, the facts add so much meaning into the story and make me want to dive in. Wait, no, that's I've used that pun already. Um,
We're going to be doing a lot of diving here, so
yeah.
let's go for it.
Yeah, let's get our goggles on and let's go underwater.
For
And
sure.
Finn is certainly a dolphin. And I just, well, no words can describe that ending of the story. I know I'm egging you on, everyone, and a lot of you don't have the book yet, but that chef's kiss, so, so great. And I'm super happy that I finally get to tell the author just how, like, I've seen these sort of adventure endings and how, well, they're adventurous, but this one just felt more. I've never read a book that's had these sort of elements, but also, okay, I was so close to spoiling the entire book. Stop
Spoilers.
myself. Yeah. So, everybody, I know I've said it once, I'll say it twice, and I'll probably say it 100 more times in this interview, but you've got to read Treasure Tracks. And speaking of tracks, I read that Henry Flagler's Oversea Railroad was the inspiration for Treasure Tracks. Will you kind of share how the spark was ignited, where that idea when, like, I should write a story about this? Or like it? And then, how did you come up with your wonderful storyline?
Yeah, so I'm fascinated with doing research and I love reading, as you do, right? We all love
Yeah.
reading. So I read a lot and I read everything. I really read every genre, kids' books, adult books, nonfiction. So I was actually reading this nonfiction story, which is written by Les Standiford, and it's called Last Train to Paradise. And it's really cool because it was like a
Ooh.
dark, stormy night, and I was reading this book in the Florida Keys, and it really details how Henry Flagler built this railroad, which connected the mainland all the way down to Key West, which was a feat because there's all this water in between all the small keys, right? So he had to build all these bridges and whatnot. And then it also details the fateful demise of this railroad, which was really, it happened during the Labor Day hurricane of 1935. And back then, we didn't have the sophisticated instruments that told you, like, hey, watch out, a hurricane's coming. So they sent a rescue train in the height of the storm, if you will, crossing over bridges. Can you imagine, like, going through like this major
Wow.
hurricane and you're crossing over bridges, water all around you, and the hurricane is like literally pummeling? So a tidal surge came and washed the railroad out to sea. So for me, it was just like, okay, well, this is true history. If I can marry true history with a fictional story and put some treasure on board that got washed out to sea, because there's so many stories of treasure found in shipwrecks or buried in some island somewhere. But I thought, how cool. Let's put it on something that's unique to the Florida Keys and that's such a rich part of our history, Flagler's Railroad. So that's how Treasure Tracks was born.
Well, there were certainly a lot of bridges between the two stories, and I need to read that nonfiction book. I'm really getting back. I used to just devour nonfiction. I only read nonfiction, and now I'm slowly getting back into it, discovering some epic reads along the way. So that's one I need to add to my bucket list and my towering TBR list. And I've got to say one more time that Treasure Tracks is such an entertaining and compelling read. And it's also just because it includes so many elements. Your story takes readers on a quest for lost treasure, a theme that has intrigued kids and adults alike for centuries. And yet, there's more. There has to be more in middle grade. And Treasure Tracks is layered with so many themes. At the top layer, the chocolate cake, we have the meaningful family connections. Then we have the strawberry, the quest for lost treasure. And then the added bonus, under the sea, which is that vanilla cake. And from the start of writing, did you know that you were going to include so much in your book? Or did all the layers kind of develop over time? And also, how did the story change? Like, from where you started Treasure Tracks, and then until you finished? Was the title different? Was who knows what different?
I think I knew the title from the start, but a lot of it really, and by the way, I love your analogy with the cake. Now I'm a little hungry, but
Me too, me too.
right? Let's have some cake after this. No, key lime pie. We gotta have key lime pie.
Oh, yes. We've got to have the
Love the story.
leftover pie from Thanksgiving.
So anyway, yes, I think that a lot of it really just kind of happens organically. I'm more of what you call a pantser, and that is that I don't necessarily write like this huge detailed outline and I know where my story's going from the start. I wish I did, and I really admire writers that do, but
Me
that
too.
is not me. It kind of evolves as I'm writing, and yes, I write an organized outline as I'm going forward to keep myself organized and be able to go back to it, but I'm definitely more of a pantser. So I'm kind of telling myself the story as I write it. And then with the revisions, which is really where the treasure, again, my little pun comes in, it's like I added all these different layers and, of course, the marine facts. And so it really just kind of evolved as I went along. And I just, it's, I just kind of roll with it. And Finn and
Yeah.
the characters kind of take a life of their own and they start telling me where the story is going. So I always write the beginning and I write the ends because I know where I'm ultimately trying to get to. But then everything in the middle really kind of happens organically as I go along. And that was certainly the case for Treasure Tracks.
Well, I'm just a I'm just a pantser. You're an organized pantser, so I admire you for that. Well,
Not that organized.
semi-organized. I'm just all over the place, writing the middle, then the beginning, then the end, and then all these random paragraphs that probably won't even stay in the very next draft.
And
But
that's part of the process for
yeah,
sure. And I jump around too. I mean, I'll jump in and like, oh my God, I want to write this middle section. And then thank God for cut and paste and
yeah,
the programs that allow us to do that. All the respect for writers before that used to just sit there and write a draft on a typewriter.
yeah, so much respect. I don't know how you could do that. Not in today's world. No
Right.
way. And I was certainly attracted to your awesome cover art. Like,
Aw.
I just wow. Not only is it beautiful, but it's also accurate. Because it's really what the sea would look like. At the top, the sun always shines, and on the top of the water, awesome. And you have the boat at the top, the scuba gear, the sea life at the bottom. Wowzers! That's probably a top 10 cover art ever. Just it's so detailed, so precise, down to the millimeter. Well, I mean, the ocean is a lot bigger than a book, but you know what I mean. I love it. Treasure Tracks
Aw.
is all around an amazing story. And I remember you posting that your son's teacher would play my podcast in his class. I was jumping up and down and screaming because no one's ever said that. And I think that's really awesome to know. And knowing you have a school-aged kid, I'm curious to know if you shared your writing with your son, and did he give you any feedback or help with the direction of the story at any point?
Absolutely. And yes, I had a brilliant artist and illustrator, and I do love the cover myself, but it is a true fact. They actually, you're the favorite podcast, you're their go-to podcast that they play
Aw.
in school. And it's such a wonderful resource for young readers and students everywhere. So they were doing their own little podcast and they used yours as the go-to perfect solution to emulate, if
Wow.
you will. So yes. So kudos to you. Um, but yes, in terms of the family dynamics that came into play with writing my own novel, I actually wrote treasure tracks during the quarantine period of the pandemic, and we were actually locked into the Keys. And I wanted to take kids on this great outdoor adventure, right? Because we were all like kind of cooped up, we were locked in. Organized sports weren't a thing. And we just, it was kind of a sad and lonely time for kids, I think, certainly for my kids and for us as adults too, for everyone. So I wanted to take everybody on this outdoor adventure. And we actually had a writing adventure, if you will, because my kids, I actually have three boys. So I have one that's a middle grade reader. He was 10 years old at the time that I wrote this novel. And then my middle son was also middle grade at that time. Now my two older sons are a little older, but every one of my three boys really kind of had a stake in getting this novel. My youngest was kind of my superstar because he would read everything. He would just go draft after draft, reading and giving me feedback. And I think it's one of the reasons that the story is kind of touted as being a very fast-paced novel for reluctant readers, because he really took out everything that he considered boring. He's like, it slows down a little bit here. So I think that's ultimately why it's very fast-paced, because it has the blessing of my middle grade sons at the time. And then my older son, he's really this great adventurer. He's also dive certified, like my husband and I are. And he loves boating and fishing. So he would be going out and he's like, Mom, I came across this really cool reef. You have to include it. And he actually came up with the reef that's featured on the cover,
Oh,
which is
wow.
a reef. It's called Elbow Reef in the John Penny camp in Key Largo. So he actually came up with it because it's got this really neat history with a shipwreck that has ties to Havana, Cuba, which also tied into the story. And he would come up with different research sound bites. And then my middle son, his role was really, he's kind of the funny guy in my family. So if you notice, Finn has a
Mhm.
little bit of humor going on with his personality. So he kind of injected some of that humor, and it's a funny story. There's a scene in Treasure Tracks that is about a squid dissection. And I couldn't remember. I'm sure I probably did one at some point in my life, but I couldn't remember. So I knew he had done one in fifth grade, and I sat him down on the computer and I was like, buddy, you got to write this for me because I can't remember what this is like, but I really want to include a squid dissection. So it was really funny because he had like exploding ink on his lab partner and this and that. So I just edited a little bit, but that is actually my middle son that wrote those few
Wow.
paragraphs about the squid dissection. So 100% it was a family affair writing this novel, which was so much fun.
I think something that we all want to know. Like, we all want to know, do you have any other books in the works or plans for middle grade, YA, picture books, or even adult in the future?
Of course, my favorite space is definitely middle grade. So I think I'm going to stick to middle grade for now.
Woo!
And I'm working, yes, I'm working. I think one thing that you'll always find as a constant in my works is a lot of the ocean, because that's just kind of who I am. I am working on a novel right now that is set in my home country of Puerto Rico. So I am having so much fun, and it has a little bit of my personal history intertwined. And I'm just having so much fun researching and finding all these little nuggets of treasure to include in it. So yes, I can't get into too many details, but that is what I'm currently working on right now.
So, what are you currently reading, Sallie?
So I've got a list here of some books that I am reading, because
Ooh.
last weekend I was actually presenting at the Miami Book Fair with some
Oh, wow.
amazing authors. So I bought, when I present on a panel, I like to buy everybody's books and read them, because you get to know these authors, so you want to dive into their adventures, right? So I have Two Degrees by
Yeah.
Alan Gratz, which I know you interviewed him not too long
Yeah.
ago. So this was amazing, and it has one of the three stories featured in the novel is actually a hurricane which hits Miami. So that hit a little too close to home because he annihilated my hometown. I told him as well that
Yeah.
you basically annihilated my hometown, but it was a fabulous book. So I've read that one, and I'm starting The Last Beekeeper by Paulo
Oh, I've
Cartaria,
heard of
who's
that.
also on my panel. And then this fun book, which is Sasquatch by Laura Krantz. So
Oh.
who doesn't love a Bigfoot adventure, right?
Uh-huh.
and and that one is actually nonfiction. So yes, I've got my reading plate very full.
You certainly do, and you have some great ones there. I haven't heard of Sasquatch, but nonfiction.
Yes, it's nonfiction.
Maybe there really is a Bigfoot Sasquatch out there somewhere. And I
Yes.
I always love the reading books about possibilities. Like, who knows, maybe there is a treasure from that very hurricane, the Labor Day hurricane, in the ocean. Who knows?
You never know. And to be honest, that's one of the reasons that I was inspired to set this book in the Florida Keys. There are over 1,000 shipwrecks in the Florida Keys. So and a lot of these were treasures because the Florida Keys was the route from the old world to the new world. So the Spanish galleons would come loaded with treasure, and a lot of the biggest treasure fleet ever found was the Nuestra Senora de Atocha off the coast of Key West. So it's just a lot of treasure to be found down there.
I always love asking middle grade authors, who inspired you to pursue writing?
So for me, I'd have to 100% say it was my mother, and I actually dedicated the novel Treasure Tracks to her. She was an avid reader, and I gotta say, she probably read about a book a night. She was, yeah, she was really intense. So she passed on that love of reading to me. So I remember on weekends we would go to the mall, and I didn't really get a lot of toys, but I got a lot of books. So it was always like, okay, what do you want to read? So she passed on that love of writing to me, and she always inspired me. I remember her always telling me, oh, you're such a good writer and you're so creative. And so she kind of passed on that kind of inspiration, if you will. And she did pass. She was very sick, and she lived in my house for the last 2 years. And I think the writing helped me cope with the grief. So that's really when I got started as a true novelist. And it was also my gift to her, if you will. It was really like, Mom, I did this for you. So yes, that's kind of the backstory.
My final question of the interview is the one I ask every single author that I've ever interviewed. If you could be or meet any literary character, it could be your favorite author or your favorite book protagonist. If you could meet anybody, fictional or real, who would it be and why?
This is a really tough question because I think with every book, right, the whole goal is to put yourself in the position of that character and kind of transport yourself to another world. But I have to say, I'm going to kick it back to when I was a middle grade reader and I was growing up in Puerto Rico, and I lived in an island, right? So I knew there was this great big world outside of Puerto Rico that I wanted to explore because, an island tends to get small after a while. So I have to say that when I was at that age, I probably wanted to explore and go to fantastical worlds, be it Lucy going off to Narnia or Peter flying off to Neverland. So I would say that those were probably adventures that really had an imprint on me as a child, and I really wanted to be them. I really wanted to go off on those adventures.
And it has been such a treat having you on my podcast, Sallie. Your story is not just bit my tongue. Ow. Your story is not just interesting, but it's also my heart burst after reading it. Such a heartwarming read. And I love that you included historical facts as well as under the sea facts and humor and family connections in Treasure Tracks. It's such a well-rounded and beautiful book. It needs all the recognition in the world. It deserves it. And to be able to write such an amazing debut book, that's also really inspiring for aspiring authors like me who really want to get their stories out there in the world. And maybe we're worried that we won't really have a chance. So seeing just treasure tracks, wowzers, so good. Seeing
Thank
that
you,
gives me a little
E-Train.
bit of hope.
I
And
can't wait to read your stories. And you're doing everything right. You're reading, you're getting all these inside tips from authors. So I know that it's going to happen very soon. And I can't wait to read your books.
well, thank you, Sallie. It means the world to me that you came on the podcast. And also, if your kid's class is watching, tell them I said hi. Hello.
I
And
love it.
until then, everybody, until you read Treasure Tracks, you can follow Sallie on social media as well as on her website, sarodriguezbooks.com. All those links are in the description. And that is all for today, everybody.
Thank you, E-Train. This has been my favorite podcast ever.
Thank you so
rock.
much. Well, you're one of my favorite podcast guests ever. My heart is full, and I'm just very glad you could join me today, and I'm sure everybody else is, because you all learned a lot, right? Give us a virtual round of applause. Give Sallie a virtual round of applause, I should say.
Give it to E-Train. He's the host.
Thank you so much once again for joining me. Thanks for listening, everybody. And as always, why did I do that weird voice? As always, keep on reading, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.